Hello, welcome to the Deadly Analysis Podcast. I'm Jim, and I'm here with Shayra and Ben and Noah, and we're going to discuss the 1988 Dutch film Spoorloos, also known as The Vanishing. Now, this is the foreign language film, not the remake with Jeff Bridges, which we're going to pretend doesn't exist. Now, if you're new to our podcast, we dissect really good horror movies and discuss them in relationship to philosophy. And if you haven't seen Spoorloos or The Vanishing, we'll be spoiling it. It's directed by George Schlauser. It tells the story of a young couple, and Saskia, the young woman, disappears at a gas station. From there, the film essentially becomes a character study of these two men. The killer, Raymond, Raymond, I'll be anglicizing his name, and the bereaved man, Rex. Spoorloos is one of those into the mind of a serial killer movies, much like Brian De Palma's 1992 film Raising Cain, Dressed to Kill, which De Palma made in 1980, and later, of course, Silence of the Lambs in 1991. So this fits right in that tradition of going into the mind of disturbed individuals. And one of the things that's revealed about Raymond is that he chooses to bury Rex and Saskia alive because Raymond himself is claustrophobic. He essentially kills others using his own worst fear. So let's start there. Let's start at the end. If you were a sociopathic murderer, which of your fears would you use to dispatch your victims? Noah, do you want to go first on this one?
Wow. First off, what a great first question, Jim. Great kickoff. That really brings out the best in us. Love it. Love it. Since I am a sadistic sociopathic murderer, I will go ahead and answer this question for you. I would dispatch, I think, a fear of nothingness, of unbecoming, because that's my fear. So maybe I would take a person and strap them to a table in a completely pitch black room. And in this room, there's water that's like only a couple feet deep, right? So you have a pitch black room filled with water and a person that's strapped to a gurney. And that gurney can either go up or down with the push of a button, let's say. I would then lower the gurney just slightly below the surface of the water so that the person begins to drown in this already pitch black room. And just as they're beginning to drown, I would raise them back up just slightly above the surface of the water and tell them over, let's say, like a speaker intercom or something, just how close they got, how close they were to ceasing to be a person. That the pitch black that they were experiencing in that room is about to become a sea of unbecoming in mere moments. This is what I would be telling them. Yeah, you asked for this, Jim. Just want to point that out. You asked for this question. I would then let them in on the bad joke that, like everyone else who's ever lived and been snuffed out of existence, they're about to unbecome in mere moments from now. And I would let them reflect on that. I would then lower them back into the water and keep them there just slightly under the water as they merged with the infinite black sea of unbecoming. But that's just me. What about you guys?
No, wait, hold on. Let's pick this apart a little bit, because I think we need to think about like the feasibility of this. So this idea that you've sort of come up with, I think, is very engineering heavy. Now, when we think about the main character of our movie at hand, he has some familiarity with his method of dispatching victims, obviously, like it comes with his expertise.
True.
And so I think that needs to be part of the criteria. Like if you're going to be hypothesizing ways in which you might actually dispatch your victims, I think we should make it a little bit more realistic. So I think Noah, you would help them communicate to an uncomfortably efficient degree. I feel, or maybe you would teach them to dispatch themselves. Like thinking about. Like,
I would just basically trap them in like a float tank. Have you guys ever been in one of those like float tank things? I bought a Groupon a few years ago to do like one of those saltwater float tanks where like you lie backwards in a float tank and the door's closed, you're in utter darkness and you just float there. All right. It's supposed to relax you. One of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced as a human being was lying in a float tank on my back with the door closed. Had a problem getting the door open. That didn't help, so I thought I was locked in there. Couldn't find the fucking door at first. Almost had to hit a panic button. So I'm sitting there floating on my back, and then I didn't float like I was supposed to. My fat ass kept going under the water, so I'm in the situation where I can't see anything from you. You can put your hand this close, and you can't see your hand. You're supposed to float and sort of just merge with darkness. And in my mind, I'm going, this is not helpful. This is my biggest fear as a human being. Why did I buy this Groupon? This was the worst Groupon I've ever purchased. And so I'm thinking, in my scenario, I just go back to that same place where that float tank was, and I just throw someone in there, just add a gurney and some straps. Doesn't need to be an announcement over an intercom. I just crack the door open. Yo, bitch, you're about to become unbecoming. Close the door. Simple. Make do with what you can. Modern problems require modern solutions, Ben.
Is there a Groupon for that?
Yeah, not that part. The additional part was probably twice the price. I didn't sign up for that level, but yeah.
What about you, Ben? Instead of workshopping Noah's, how are you going to be your kill others with your own worst fear?
No, see, I'm a normal person. I haven't really thought this through. I don't think I would ever actually kill a person.
That's the person that scares me. The person who says, I'm a normal person, I haven't thought this through, has the best answer. He just doesn't want to say it. That's my experience.
So what do you say, Ben?
I think I don't like helplessness. I don't like feeling helpless. I'm a very independent individual, right? I like feeling efficacious. I don't like relying on others too much to be able to do the things that I need to do in life. And so I feel like if that were taken away from me, that would be pretty terrifying, right? If I were just completely left without the ability to help myself. And so whenever I think about something like that, if we're going really hardcore with it, I might actually just do what you see in either in Red Dragon or Hannibal, right? It's where you essentially have the pigs and they're going to let the pigs or whatever eat the person's feet or something like that. So it would be something like that, right? So slowly you're kind of painfully losing your ability maybe to walk, or you lose your hands so you can't get yourself free. Eventually you're just kind of laying there completely helpless, maybe paralyzed, something like that. I don't know. I really haven't thought about it too much, but in that film in particular, I think that's a really interesting example of how to make somebody feel incredibly helpless. That doesn't require a bunch of expensive engineering.
Yeah, you have to avoid any sort of workmanship in your murder plan.
I have never seen Ben become much more of a utilitous person than this conversation. I get it, though. I get it.
All right, mine is multifaceted, but it puts in all of the things that are my fears. Someone would be dressed as a clown, or I guess I would dress as a clown. Oh, that's horrifying. I wouldn't even be able to look at my own reflection. I would dress as a clown, and I would cause someone to become paralyzed but completely aware of everything around them, and strip off little pieces of their skin, a la, the demon from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, what he did to Willow. Stripping off little individual pieces of the skin and eating it right in front of them, and then putting needles into them and doing the kitty, 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 and then eventually somehow finding some kind of a pill or something to put in the person that would cause them to have forever dementia. That would probably be the worst thing that could happen to me. So if I was going with my worst fears, that would be it.
Yeah, so involuntary frontal lobotomy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you could get that done too.
Yeah, and I mean, if I wanted to go full on with realistic stuff, because of documentaries I've seen, is when they would stick the ice pick in your corner of your eye to do it.
Right.
Swirly bits. Yeah, that would probably be absolutely horrific to me. So, yeah.
Loss of control seems to be your thing. This is one of the reasons why when we first talked about Spoorloos, this is why I recommended it to you, Shayra. I was like, of all the people in the podcast, I thought to myself, this will scare Shayra, I think, the most, just like it scared me,
So what is it about this film that scares you, Noah? Let's sort of, try and transition this into what makes this a horror movie. I mean, it has limited violence, it has limited gore, but why is this scary? Why is this a horror film?
Yeah, so I think this is a pure psychological horror films. Psychological horror films are really all about what is not shown, right? And of course, what's not shown in Spoorloos is one thing. It's what's happened to Saskia, right? This is a film that utilizes dread in that regard. It utilizes tension, but I think infinitely more than those things, it masters the art of drawing out curiosity from the viewer, right? So many a psychological horror film draws on some part of the viewer's curiosity to know who the villain is or why they're doing what they're doing, or if the protagonist is going to survive, yada, 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 right? Sometimes it's not just about gore and violence. Sometimes it's about what's in the box, so to speak. So I think Spoorloos draws entirely on the desire to know what happened to Saskia. I mean, look, in this movie, you're given who the killer is like a third of the way through the movie. You know his motivations for abducting Saskia. You know his reasons for abducting Saskia. You know how he abducted Saskia. You know where it happened, you know how it happened, and you know to whom it happened, and even the effects of it happening. The only thing you don't know is what ultimately happened to Saskia. And in that sense, I think what this movie does so well is that it makes you share the same psychological torment to a certain degree as Rex. Like, this is one of the more brilliant aspects of this movie, is that it puts you in the place of a kind of shared empathy with Rex. Like, by the end of this movie, Rex's torment kind of becomes yours. I mean, I remember as this movie was progressing on and on the first time I watched it, I was hanging on my seat wanting to know, like, what the fuck happened to Saskia? Like, just tell me. I remember hitting a point in the movie just going, just tell me what happened to this chick. Like, what is, like, I want to know what happened to her. And so to the extent that I think psychological horror places a particular focus on mental and emotional and psychological states that aim to frighten or disturb or unsettle the audience. In that sense, this film, I think, captures that to a T, right? So it strikes me as a very obvious, but also a purely psychological horror film in that sense.
And I think it works structurally. It sort of goes from a whodunit to a why done it to a how done it, and then eventually a what is it. And it's well structured in the sense that it's able to sort of seamlessly transition from each of these elements of mystery. You know, if we take a look at most mysteries, they usually do one or two things. They're either a whodunit or a why done it or a how done it. But this manages to be all three and, you know, seamlessly move between those. So, you know, in that sense, it's well done. But, you know, I think that when we're taking a look at this as a horror film, there's a character in here who serves as kind of the answer to the audience and could be just as much the audience surrogate as Rex is, and that's Lienke. I'm not going to pronounce her name correctly, but it's Rex's second girlfriend in the film, and she's just basically saying, look, if you accept the fact that she's dead, and clearly he does, then what's the beef, dude? Like, you accept that she's dead, then let her go and come lay on the beach with me and do nothing. So I wonder, how does that get into how does that relate to your positioning yourself in relationship to this film? Like, clearly you seem to identify with Rex's motivation, but did Rex's second girlfriend, Lienke, I'm not going to pronounce her name correctly, did her appearance in the movie serve at all to alter your self-identification with one of the characters?
No, I don't think that Lienenke is a analog for the viewer. I think that I think that Rex's relationship with her is a representation of what life would be like were he able to move on. Like, she's kind, she's empathetic, she's understanding. She's door number 2 for Rex, right? She's not necessarily the viewer. The viewer's Rex. You share everything in common with Rex, not Lianake, right? But Lianake is essentially a way out for Rex. It's his door number 2, right? So I would characterize their relationship as something like the potentiality of moving on without answers, of being okay without knowing, right? Like, Lianake is sort of our option to turn this movie off as viewers. Like, we know that at a certain point in this movie, we know it's going to end poorly, right? We don't need to know what happened. I'm good, right? Like, that sort of thing. That's what Lianake is. But we all know when we watch this movie that we're going to pick door number 1, and door number 1 is Saskia. And Rex picks door number 1, right? So Lianake is really, I think, the film's way of giving us an early indicator of how far Rex is willing to go in order to get the truth. If he's willing to end a seemingly good relationship with an obviously gorgeous woman in his obsession with Saskia's disappearance, then what else is he willing to do, right? Like, I wrote in my notes, Saskia is kind of like a Klondike bar. Like, what would you do for a Saskia? Well, according to him, you drink some spiked coffee, hang out in the rain with your abductor, and then get buried alive, right? So I think
that's so Klondike bar, man.
It totally is, yeah. I think that her role in this film is a representation of what things are without this obsession. With it's door number 2, all things considered. I don't think that she ought to be viewed as just another observer, as opposed to an option for the observer.
Although I will say that she is definitely less sexualized than Saskia is.
Sure.
Is in her costuming, in the way she's shot, in the way she's lit, she is far less sexualized than Saskia. And in that sense, it's the director trying to sort of tip the hand to what we're supposed to be obsessed with and what we're supposed to be interested in. But let's give the other Ben, you look like you want to say something. Let's talk about the genre in this and what makes this a horror film for you.
Just to back up just a little bit.
Okay, sure.
We can launch into that. Yeah, just a couple points on this though, because this is actually a really interesting train of conversation that we've struck on already. First, I just want to say that I would change the language a little bit, Jim. I think I'm digging a lot of what you're saying so far. I think I would change the language a little bit. Instead of saying that Saskia was sexualized, to say that she was romanticized. I didn't really see any sort of, and I'm thinking about this just to make sure that I don't have any evidence of it. But I don't think I ever saw her really being really sexualized. I mean, it's clear in the beginning of the movie that she and Rex were in love, I think. But it was more of it was more innocent than that. And I think that's really kind of like what they were trying to portray, was this image of, we're in the garden. This is the Garden of Eden. Everything's innocent. And then suddenly everything just drastically changes. And that's sort of like what we see as the beginning of Rex's obsession. So that's just like one minor sort of thing I would change there, just the tone. But I think it's kind of interesting because I actually believe that this movie does have 2 main characters. And because it spends so much time trying to get us to empathize with Raymond. And I think that's exactly how he was able to sort of bait Rex at the end, right? Of course he has Saskia to hang over his head, and that's kind of like the initial thing. He's been chasing this girl for 3 years, trying to figure out what happened to her, where she went, even though in the back of his head, he knows, as we know, she's probably dead. And that, again, like we've talked about already, is sort of the conclusion. She's died. If you can accept that, if you can move on, then you can live a better life. You can let go, and you're no longer susceptible to that baiting and that hunted relationship. But once he finally does, Rex ends up meeting Raymond, the entire 30 minutes after that, I think it's another like half an hour of the movie, or maybe even 40 minutes of the movie is spent on them just sort of traveling. There's even a scene at one point where they're out hanging out in like this jungle gym and they have a laugh. Like they actually have a brief chuckle together when they talk about how that guy's last name is Poof, which I believe in French is actually a way to call somebody effeminate or gay. I think that's what the joke that they were making there was. But yeah, I mean, they have this moment where they actually seem to kind of connect. And that's what's, I think, the most interesting part. Like that's really sort of like this important pivotal point in the movie to me, because you actually see sort of like the dichotomous relationship between these two characters. And because of that, I really do think that Raymond is also kind of like a second main character and a second perspective, much in the way that you would see like in all those movies that you talked about in the beginning, or even more recently, like in the house that Jack built. Like the point is that you're supposed to be freaked out, or at least me, I was freaked out by the fact that this character is so relatable. And it seems like it's a matter of degrees between a normal person and somebody who just wants to go the step further, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. So let's, and that's actually, I mean, that's, I think we're going to spend some time on both of these main characters. Although in interviews, the director George Schlauser talks about how he considers Raymond to be the main character and Rex to be like a secondary main character. So the idea of Rex being an audience surrogate, as Noah hit upon, I think is right on, and that the main event, so to speak, would be Rex or Raymond. You know, this is the reason the audience is paying his $5 to get inside this guy's head, and that Rex is sort of the surrogate for that. The way I've sort of structured this a little bit later is let's spend some time talking all about Raymond, and then spend some time talking all about Rex, so that we can kind of suss out who each of these men are, because I think this is a character study as much as it's a horror film. But Shaver, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to what about this film is scary? What about this film is a horror film? Let's have you weigh in on that, and then we'll just proceed to talking all about Raymond and then all about Rex.
The scariest part for me is that the killer is a really nice guy, a family man with kids. He's actually a good person. In fact, he saved somebody's life, and it's because of his conversation with his daughter, where she called him a hero, that he decided to even go on this quest to see if he really is a good person or not. And it was actually Rex who's kind of a dick. I mean, he abandons her in this tunnel, and the killer guy's actually kind of interesting and nice, and has a nice family, and they have a good time together. They eat outside, classy eating. I mean, that is probably the most horrific part, is that the killers, and this does happen in real life, the killers very much can be personable, charming, normal people in everyday life. I mean, we've heard about serial killers who their partner doesn't even know that they've been killing all these people. They have no fucking clue. And then they find out and they don't even believe it, because how could that possibly be? That is the most horrific part, is that this is super realistic. The idea that a family man could just be living his life and then deciding to go on some quest to murder people in what he thought was the most horrendous way possible. Just out of, am I a good guy? I don't know. Let's do some testing of myself and see how far I'm willing to go. Holy shit, that's fucked up. But I also think it's fucked up that the asshole could be the person who obsesses over trying to get some control over a situation. And honestly, it kind of makes sense. They look like they're on that quits in some ways. Yes, they still love each other, but there seems to be some conflict there. She was even the one that first talked to the serial killer guy. So it seems like maybe she was not so interested in that relationship anymore. Maybe he wasn't either. They were, they're fighting and stuff. I don't know. It could have been on the outs. It could be something that you could repair. But, when you have these, troubled issues that you're going through, he abandoned her in a tunnel. That was kind of fucked.
Oh, yeah.
And then having that control taken away, he can't even decide to cut the relationship off or let it continue. She's just missing, and he doesn't know what happens. So,
I mean, I think you're right that there's that moment where Rex leaves her is important to understanding his character and important as sort of understanding the whole thing. But questioning, I think that I wouldn't necessarily say that she was talking to Raymond in the gas station with the hopes of any form of infidelity with Raymond.
I don't think she was doing that, but
why would you say that?
It seems very strange to just all of a sudden to talk to a stranger, like just some random guy. Like that's really weird to me. I wouldn't do that. An ATM thing. That's a strange thing to do, to talk to a random stranger in that way. Maybe it's because I've been paranoid, my whole fucking life. I lived in Northern California where the Golden State Killer was a thing, and so we were told to put sticks in our windows and never talk to anybody.
I was just going to say that's exactly why there's a difference here. I mean, to you, and I get it. There's a sense of Monday morning quarterbacking, seeing all the. I mean, this is 1988.
True.
So there's. I mean, there's 30 years of
stranger danger.
Yeah, there's 30 years of evolution in there where now we're just like, well, you looked at me the wrong way, I'm gonna fucking call the cops, So yeah, I completely understand.
This in 1988 we were told about this stuff. My family was very paranoid. My dad was teaching me all different kinds of ways to fight against anybody who might come into our house. We had guns that were readily available. We were learning how to use them at young ages. My family was pretty paranoid about that stuff, but he was literally right next to us. Like the Golden State Killer was found in Citrus Heights, which was like 15 minutes from our house. So there was a lot of break-ins happening and a lot of rapes happening and a lot of murders happening. So honestly, like when I talked to some of my friends where we grew up, we were told at a very young age to be afraid of this stuff. Maybe it's not the case in where were they? I don't know. I don't even know where that gas station was located. Was that
they were in France in the 80s. Yeah. So
they may not have had as scary of a situation, but for me, that just it seems like dangerous thing to do. But yeah, you're right. It's probably also looking back at all these different killers that we know about now and knowing that that's probably the worst possible thing to do. And honestly, I wish guys would know this too. Like when girls are shutting you down when you talk to them in public, they're not trying to be assholes. They're afraid you might kill them. Seriously, just know that's what girls are thinking. It's no offense to you. It's something we know has popped up in stories, and we don't want to be a statistic. So
yeah, I mean, look, if any incels are watching this, just lead with "I'm not a serial killer," and then say what you want to say, and I'm sure that will go well for you. So
the first thing I say when I meet a new person. So let's talk about Raymond. So as Shayra alluded to, he basically says that his decision to kill is sort of a logical one in his own mind. He saves a drowning girl. He says that he jumps in. Well, his daughter says that he jumps in without a second thought. There was a second thought. And he saves the drowning girl. He thinks of himself as a hero. His daughter says that he's a hero. But then, as he says, I thought that her admiration wasn't worth anything unless I could prove myself absolutely incapable of doing anything evil. Does this let's do what the movie wants us to do and what the movie is trying to do. Let's get in the head of a serial killer. Does this logic make sense?
I'll start by saying on the surface, this just seems very simplistic and childlike, that idea, right? But I thought her admiration wasn't worth anything unless I could prove myself absolutely incapable of doing anything evil. That's what makes me a hero to him, right? And it's almost like a child's idea of Superman. The idea that being a true hero means that you're incapable of just doing anything bad. It's sort of like the take your vitamins and drink your milk naivete that, a child has about their hero. But Raymond conceives this sort of attitude as an an adult, which is really strange, right? Obviously, as an adult, one sees the broad complexities of being a person, being a hero in one moment obviously doesn't mean you're incapable of doing evil in the next. Like everybody's capable of doing evil things, and being an adult, you would think that he knows that. So the only thing I can think of for him to have this attitude is that this attitude is a function of Raymond's narcissism. It's a part of his sociopathy, right? In other words, it's simply a justification for Raymond to experiment with cruelty and wickedness. It's sort of a way of justifying to himself and partaking in this heinous action that he's going to do with Saskia through a kind of curiosity, through the vehicle of curiosity. So the idea is like this. Only heroes are incapable of evil actions? Well, then am I a hero? Well, let's see. Am I incapable of or capable of a really evil action? Let's find out. Right? So it's like this really simplistic way of justifying to oneself the evil that you're about to inflict. Does that make sense? It's like an outworking of a kind of narcissism. That's the way I saw that. However, above that, beyond that, the most important thing to keep in mind here is that Raymond initiates this kind of experiment as a kind of curiosity, right? Am I capable of doing a great evil if I'm not a hero? Let's find out, right? And this really underscores the idea that curiosity, no matter what character you look at, curiosity is the centerpiece of this movie. And I'll go into this in some of the additional questions and stuff, and some of the stuff we're going to talk about. But I think that curiosity is really, this goes back to curiosity being the centerpiece of this movie for Raymond, for Rex, and for us as viewers.
All right, so from my side too, I mean, whenever I think about Raymond, there's something else that really comes to mind here. Like, obviously, he's going to be a very scientifically minded individual, and of course, like what Noah was talking about, we see this sort of experimentation, right? That all makes perfect sense to me. What's kind of curious though is, his explanation of how he imagined what he said was the worst possible thing, and then just sort of started taking small steps toward that. Take one step, and then another, and then another. And he even mentions, of course, that the worst possible thing he can imagine isn't dying. And so that's kind of interesting. So I think what we assume is that what he imagined at that point, because that's really what did he imagine? Like, he never explicitly says what it was. I don't think it was what he did to Saskia. Like, I don't think it was burying people alive, which is his method of killing. Of course, obviously we're allowed to do spoilers here, so I don't think that was it. I think at the very end, like his whole thing with Raymond, that was probably the worst possible thing. He took someone away from somebody, created this enemy for himself, created this obsession. This guy couldn't let it go for 3 years. He approaches the guy, convinces him willingly to get in his car, knowing what's going to happen, convinces him to take the poison himself, and basically tells him about what's, I'll tell you exactly what happened to Saskia if you do this, if you do this, if you do this. And he keeps setting the bar one step forward for him and luring him to his own demise. And so that, I think, was probably really his grand plan the entire time. Like, for most of this movie, when you see him planning out, like, all these individual steps, hear me out now, like, he's planning this out, he's timing it, he's thinking about the timings from, the house to this other point, like, he has 3 or 4 minute window, right, like, all this stuff, he's getting this down pat. But really what he wants to do is he wants to try and take that and push it one step further. So once you set all these boundaries for yourself, in terms of the parameters of how you might kill a person, what's the logical next step? Of course, it's going to be to try and push yourself beyond those parameters. And so he goes to another country, even a totally other country, takes away all these different things. Like, he doesn't have to chloroform the guy. He doesn't have to, worry about the mileage and like the timing and all this stuff. He stretches his experience so far out that it gets to the point where he's baiting this guy 3 years down the road and getting him to like willingly allow himself to be killed. Like, what else could Rex have possibly imagined was going to happen once he got in that car? Really? Like, what did he think was going to happen? And so whenever I think, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'll talk about that in a second. I mean, I do want to talk about Rex's internal motivations in a moment, but
yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah, keep going with that, and then I do want to respond though.
Okay, but yeah, so like whenever we think about like his explanation, right? So Raymond's explanation, his logic of why he did what he did, I really do think that makes a lot of sense because like of course, you know, when he's a kid, he gets on that ledge, he pushes himself to the ledge and wants to see if he would be willing to throw himself off because he knows that most people would not do that. And he says, "Can I do this?" And his entire life, of course, there's a big jump, right? He says it's 26 years from that point until he jumps off that bridge, but that kind of sets off again that pattern in his mind of having that behavior where he just wants to chase this greater and greater experience. And so that I think is understandable because a lot of people have that where they have this experience and they can't let it go and they want to push it farther and farther. It's classic addictive behavior, I think. So you get this like this feeling, maybe he is a little bit sociopathic, which means maybe he doesn't necessarily feel emotions the same way. Maybe he doesn't feel emotions or excitement or adrenaline quite as often because he has sort of this lack of ability to feel disgust or like fear or whatever it is, right? There's something there that he lacks. And so if he finds this experience that allows him to feel something kind of intense, it gets his heart racing, I think that's really what he's chasing ultimately. And because his mind is the way it is, that's what leads him to do this crazy sort of violent thing. But if you really boil it down to like the chasing of an experience, I think we can really start to wrap our minds around why exactly it is that he continued to do that. Does that make sense at all, or am I completely
It does.
off the
It
rails?
does.
No, it does. It does.
Yeah.
I have a counter to that, but I'm going to hold off on it and let Jim go. But I want you to hold that thought because I have a really good counter to it, Ben. But yeah,
okay.
it makes sense. It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we could sort of tag team on this because I think I want to push back in two ways. First, I want to say that I think you're right that I think you hit the nail on the head when you talk about he's chasing the experience. He's chasing defying predestination, defying the modes of thought that he was previously inculcated to believe. I think that all of that is right on. But I think you're ascribing to him a little bit too much a little too much intelligence because I don't think that he could have guessed that that based upon him picking up Saskia that Rex would behave the way Rex behaved after the disappearance of Saskia. Because remember, Saskia is his second attempt at a victim. Well, Saskia is like his 20th attempt at a victim, but the second at that particular gas station. So I don't think that he was sort of playing 20 steps ahead, three-dimensional chess to figure out. To know that based upon the way Rex and Saskia pull up in the car, that Rex would be the person that Rex is. But when he is presented with Rex as Rex is on the talk show, where Rex sort of says, "I just want to know what's going on." At that point, I think you're right that he is chasing that addictive behavior. He is chasing that adrenaline rush of doing what he did to Rex, doing what he did to Saskia to Rex. I think you're right there. But I also don't want to apply too much suaveness to this guy. I think he is a perfect representation of the banality of evil because he's fumbling, he's awkward, he's just sort of standing there like, excusez-moi, mademoiselle, could you help me with my thing? And he looks like, you look creepy as fucking shit, man. You really do. Nobody's gonna go into your fucking voiture with you, all right? It's just not gonna happen for you. And because he doesn't, he's not suave, he's not debonair, he is Adolf Eichmann. He is the banality of evil. And I think that is so I think that one of the things that these serial killer movies have done since Spoorloos is and I think House the Jack, we talked about this associated with House the Jack Bell, is it in some ways glorifies the serial killer a little bit more than I am comfortable with. And one of the things I liked about Spoorloos is that they made this guy look like a schlub. And I like that he's a kind of schlubby. Noah, you're shaking your head. Why do you disagree?
No, I wanted less schlub. I wanted more bodies built into a fort. I mean, that was what I thought what I was going to get into. No, I have thoughts, but I'm going to wait until we hit some more of the other stuff with Rex. I'll defer to Shayra for this. I'll let her hop in.
Yeah, so one of the things that I found most interesting, yes, he is a schlub, but I think he's more of that dad energy. You know, like the guy with the strappy sandals but still wearing socks and like barbecuing and shit. Like he has that kind of energy. Awkward dad. Awkward dad that the teenage girl would be embarrassed around. And maybe in a way that's why he could seem like someone you could fall for some of his shit for. Of course, he adds an element to it by having, I have a broken arm, you know, how could I possibly abduct you and hurt you if I have a broken arm?
As I was telling Buffalo Bill just the other day.
Right? Like it's a really smart move though, because it would cause you, well, first off, you know, we have this tendency to try to want to help others and we feel bad if we don't help others, and he's like, oh, can you help me? And obviously he's in a situation where he can't get help. I mean, honestly, if you have hindsight, you'd probably be like, why don't you have a guy help you with this that's stronger, that's in the area? Like, what the fuck?
He's literally letting dudes go by and just going, oh, let me talk to you, rather attractive woman, and you will help me hook up my trailer.
But it's a product of the time, man. In the 80s, no one thought, you know, a guy with a thing on his arm is gonna fucking hack and slash someone in France at that time. Like that's Monday morning quarterbacking to me. I think it makes...
It still feels kind of weird, like if there's a bunch of men, like just with the idea of the, you know, views on women and they're weak and can't do stuff. It seems kind of strange. I would probably be like, what the... Why
he's a feminist.
You really
I mean, that's what I think.
Strong?
Yeah.
Like, hey.
He's a feminist, you know, that's what it is.
Here's the thing, though. I mean, I think we kind of have the explanation of that, too, throughout the movie. It's like, I'm pretty sure everyone was just assuming that he was trying to get laid. Like, that's kind of... When he met that person who was, like, his daughter's coach, like, she's like, look, if you go to this gas station over here where all these foreign women are, nobody's going to recognize you. She didn't expect him to go over there killing people. She was expecting him to go try to have an affair.
That's true. The volleyball coach. Yeah, she kind of clued him in on where to go. Oh my gosh.
Everyone impinges. Yeah, right. Everyone impinges the most sincere motives to him, which I think reflects a kind of product of the age. I think that we are all, you know, my favorite murder-esque horror movie fucking junkies, and I think that sort of sullies the way we look at this at the time.
Well, the second victim is Rex, and there's, you know, the practical reason that Raymond kills Rex, and that is that Rex knows his name and can turn him in. But Raymond knew this would happen when he went to meet Rex. So why exactly does he kill Rex? Is his murder of Rex like a form of charity to kind of put Rex out of his misery? Or what do you think is...
He wanted to have a road trip movie and hang out, just like game stories.
So what, Noah, you seem to be talking about...
That's it. You hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head with that. And this is maybe my somewhat counter to Ben. So Ben, let me know what you think of this. So I'm convinced that Raymond kills Rex and is doing this towards the end of the movie for no other reason than to put Rex out of his misery. Like his experiment that finds finality in abducting Saskia, it's been realized, and Rex is simply like an act of empathy in Raymond's mind, right? So think of the scenes where Raymond is watching Rex on television as Rex is begging the person who took Saskia to tell him what happened to her. I mean, notice there's a lot of interesting language. It's not like turn yourself in, yada. It's what happened to her, right? And we see this in the scenes where Raymond is watching, I think even Rex Rex at the cafe, right? So what I think happened is that Raymond saw a very obsessive desire in Rex to know what happened to Saskia. I think he saw that this obsessive desire was so strong that it even overshadowed revenge, which gave him the ability to approach him directly, maybe think he was going to take a few shots, but know that revenge was less than the desire to know what happened. So I think Rex isn't out for revenge. He's just compelled to know. And I think Raymond knows this. And so in seeing how tight that grip of curiosity was on Rex, how deep it bore into him, perhaps it's possible that in Raymond's mind, Rex would only be satisfied if he saw with his own eyes, if he experienced and went through exactly what Saskia went through. Like perhaps nothing else would have been enough for Rex, right? It could be the case that Raymond thought Rex would not be satisfied with, like, let's say a mere retelling of what happened to Saskia. Like he could have just approached him and said, here's what I did, right? But he didn't do that. And it could be the case that he knew from seeing what he saw of Rex that Rex would not be satisfied, wouldn't believe it. After all, there's nothing tangible there, right? He could just be lying in Rex's mind about what happened to her. But there is an honesty in offering the experience of what Saskia went through. That's something tangible. And when you're in the perspective of someone like Rex, you want the tangible. You want the truth with a capital T. So I don't think Raymond was motivated in killing Rex by like utility, right? That he was going to get caught. In fact, Raymond has a counter for pretty much every threat that Rex has for turning him in. Right? Like every time Rex says, I'm going to do this, well, he has a counter. I'm going to do this. Well, I have a counter, right?
Well, all of his counters are, yeah, but you'll never find out.
Well, that's the other thing, right? So that's right. Like that again underscores the idea that the curiosity is going to win at the end of the day. That's true. That's absolutely true. But the point is, he's not like Raymond is not scared of Rex turning him in. So then the question is, why kill him, right? And I think it's because Rex would not accept anything other than being that second golden egg. Like, in fact, Rex actually describes the dream of him being the second golden egg on that same television program where he's pleading to Saskia's abductor. And Raymond saw that, right? So Raymond heard Rex's dream about the second golden egg and just kind of gave him the opportunity to fully realize that dream, to be the second golden egg. So I see it as I see it as a kind of putting him out of his misery, giving him what he only will accept. That's why I think Raymond killed Rex.
Yeah, I mean, you're ascribing a lot of empathy to a serial killer, man. Like, I really see this as being like that's kind of like the one thing that I feel like is going to be a big flaw in this, is because you're not looking at it from the perspective of Raymond being somebody who is hunting prey. And I really think that is going to be more the mode of translation for me for like any serial killer, is going to be this person is hunting another person. And the evidence that I have for that is specifically the way that he reacted to saving that little girl. It wasn't, oh shit, there's this little girl, I have to save her. He described that situation as being another opportunity to push himself one step further. And if it wasn't for that, like I might be more on board with what you're saying. But the fact that at no point in this movie does he show any empathy for another person, really.
But he did. He jumped in to save her.
That's not what he was looking for, though. He wasn't looking for an opportunity to save somebody. He was looking for a very self-serving, narcissistic experience. Like he didn't care about the little girl. It doesn't seem like. He cared about giving himself an answer and an experience. And so, if you think he looked at Raymond, or he looked at Rex as anything other than an opportunity to push himself further and get like one step farther to, just to push things a little bit more, to have a more intense experience, I think that's a little bit contrary to his pattern as a killer, right? Like there's really no evidence to me in this movie to suggest that he's going to hear Rex's story and be like, man, that sucks. I really want to help this guy get closure. It's more like, oh shit, maybe this is prophetic. Maybe he's talking about this dream. Maybe it means something. I'm really interested now. I wonder if I can bait this guy into the same situation that I used to kill his lover or whatever, Like, so I mean, I get what you're saying, and that is really interesting. I like that interpretation. I just think that there's less evidence for that than for him just trying to hunt prey in a more interesting way.
So, okay, so maybe we can meet in the middle ground and think of it like this. Do you remember when there's a scene when Raymond is driving his car, and I think he drives right past two women that he could just really easily abduct and bury and kill and do, and he just drives right past them, right? So to me, what that says is it counters the idea that he's purely out for prey, that there's something more there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not just anybody will do, because if anybody would do, then why would he go through the trouble of planning out all these steps and writing down all these notes and scientifically measuring his heartbeat and the time it takes to get to the gas station, how long chloroform lasts on him. There's all this experimentation. There's a very methodical way that he wants to do this. And that's when you think about a serial killer having a particular method of operations, right? There's this thing, and it's usually something about fantasy fulfillment. It's never just, well, I just want to kill a random person. It's never really about just killing a person. There's something more to it. It's obvious to me that he wouldn't just go for the easy prey.
So to you, empathy is a tool to get what he wanted, maybe. We could say that.
That's exactly how psychopaths operate.
Yeah. So it's not the idea that he had empathy for Rex and decided to put him out of his misery. To you, it's he saw empathy as a tool to give him a more enhanced, a secondary victim to create the second golden egg. He saw it as a tool in order to get Rex into the box. It's bait. That's bait. That's bait. That's bait. Interesting.
Every time he said, yes, you could do that, but then you won't know what happened. He's dangling that carrot right in front of his face because he knows it's going to work.
Yeah, that's very possible. That feels like that makes sense. That not that he has the empathy, but that he's utilizing the empathy as a means for sociopathy. Interesting. Yeah.
I think that's probably more.
Two scenes that I'd like to ask you guys about then, based off of what you guys have been saying. There's one scene where he's walking with a coworker or a friend or whatever, and they see these signs going up, and he's kind of like, the fuck, this guy's still looking for this bitch, and he's kind of talking about how he's annoyed about this stuff. He's like, what girl? And he's like, the girl we always argue about. We argue about everything, and they're having this back and forth. There's that conversation where it seems like he's kind of like, this guy's still fucking tripping on this bitch. But there's also scenes where he's hanging out with his family and they're having dinner outside and they decide to just start screaming and the neighbors are screaming and there's a screaming back and forth. What do you guys think these scenes say about him as a person? Because it seems like he has friends. It seems like he has a sense of humor. It also seems like he's a really fucked up person, but...
Well, did you see what he did in that situation in the screaming thing? His daughter screamed, and then he used it as an opportunity to see if his neighbors could hear people screaming from that property. He's like, do it again, do it again. Now everyone scream as loud as they fucking can. And then he asked his neighbor, hey, did you hear anything, man? That was, I feel like he was just using that as a way to get more information that would help him do his thing. That's
right. Because
that's all it was.
I do see that. I do see that as a form of gathering, but honestly, I hear people screaming, especially kids in my neighborhood, all the motherfucking time, all day long. And I'm like, if one of these motherfuckers is getting murdered, none of us are ever going to know because these kids scream when they're playing. So I guess these kids want to get murdered because they cry wolf way too much. I don't
want to get murdered.
I know they don't want to get murdered, but honestly, I'm not going to react to a random kids scream.
I mean, it's literally it's set up in the movie that he likely put the spiders in the drawer so that he could get the scream, and so then he could test whether or not the
also it's probably he gets his rocks off on it.
What kind of Alex Jones bullshit conspiracy theory is this that he put the spiders in there? Jim, if you believe
He's a
that he
sociopath, Noah. Like,
Wait a minute. If you believe he put the spiders in that damn drawer, but you don't believe Pele orchestrated everything in Midsommar, we got some talking to have.
Hello.
We got some fucking talking to have.
We don't even
Just
have to
saying.
go that far. Like, Jim literally made the argument against me a few minutes ago that he didn't take this long game approach. He wasn't playing 3D chess. He was just opportunistic about the fact that he had another thing to action on, right? So I really, again, like, maybe he just saw this opportunity. He was like, oh, fuck. Like, let me fucking use
there's a
this.
difference between I will put spiders, maybe my daughter will scream and I can test whether or not people can hear the scream. And then based upon a couple driving up saying, if I kidnap and murder her, he will be obsessed about it. And then 3 years later, I can fuck with him.
Clearly you don't.
Very different plan. Like,
clearly you're not a statistician,
like,
though, because if you're playing the numbers, he could be like, well, like 1 out of 10 people are gonna get like real obsessed with this if I take away their whatever, and then eventually this person is gonna come along, and I just gotta wait, maybe. Again, like Alex Jones level, perhaps, but we gotta pick one lane or the other, man. Either he's a mastermind or he's an opportunist.
Yeah, Jim, the Alex Jones thing is a compliment. I mean, I'm proud that we've devolved into the depths of these conspiracy theories with the spiders in that drawer. It makes me happy to hear you say that.
Two vastly different plans. I'm pretty sure that it's self-explanatory the degree to which those are two very different. They're playing out two very different things. I think he made the decision to involve himself with Rex when he saw Rex on the television. He did not make the decision to involve himself with Rex when the car pulls up and he sees Rex and Saskia. Whether or not he made the decision to put the spiders in the drawer or not, I'm willing to sort of play with that and let that go. I think it's possible he put the spiders in the drawer to elicit a scream to test whether or not people can hear the screams. It's a rather practical plan. But knowing
we all practice it wherever we live, and whenever we move into a new place, practice screaming.
You're listening to the screams of the neighborhood children. Like, what?
I know.
Shara put spiders all over the neighborhood and just children scream everywhere. Yeah.
She doesn't even have to use the spider.
Hey, we have spiders all over our neighborhood anyway. This is like Spiderland, but especially this time of year. But like the thing is spiders are pretty like common and they're usually outside. It could have just been there, but it also could have been a plan of his. But here's one thing where things get weird. Like I said, he was hanging out with his friend, annoyed about the posters. Was he just trying to like gauge public opinion of this, or was he actually just starting to get annoyed that this guy wasn't letting up? Like, which one was it? Who was he playing?
Well, what was it that he said? I think he actually, like, his comment about it wasn't, I feel bad for this guy. It wasn't, I'm pissed that this is happening.
Why is this guy obsessed? Like, what is his problem?
Well, let's see, I think he said that he actually respected his tenacity. Like, his friend didn't give a shit. Like, that I think was actually interesting, because it was, like, a very, like...
his tenacity, yeah.
Yeah, like, it was a weird response to have to that, right? Like, that's a very curious response to have. He's, like, he's impressed that this guy has spent years, or, like... trying to find this person that he loved that was murdered. Like, of course that's going to affect you. Of course you're going to be thinking about that in 3 years. I know people who had like significant others who died of like illnesses, natural causes, whatever, and they don't stop thinking about that, right? Like, I think it's a common reaction to have when someone is taken away from you, that you never like completely get over it. So the fact that he was like, man, like, I can't believe he's still doing this, like, I really respect that, that's a little bizarre. It's, it's not like an empathetic response, it's not like an irritated response.
No,
it's
I
like
think
it's very middle of the road flat.
It hammers home Raymond's sociopathy, because he can't understand why somebody would be obsessed over someone they lost. So it hammers home that he's unable to sort of conceive of what we would consider to be a normal emotional reaction, and that is to mourn the loss of somebody even 3 years later. But let's get into Rex. Let's actually talk about him. Let's kind of transition away from Raymond and get into him. Get into Rex rather. And that's, he talks about like one of the things that so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to my review section. One of the points that I'm going to make in my review section is that I think that this movie is fascinated with Raymond, and I'm fascinated with Rex. So all of the times that we're inside Raymond's psychology, and all the times that we are inside Raymond's point of view, I'm like, no, get out of the way. I want to talk to Rex for a while. Like, I find him to be the most fascinating character in the entire film. And I think, in my review section, one of the flaws that I don't like about this movie is I think it's putting its attention in completely the least interesting of the two characters. So let's talk about what I think is more interesting character, and that is this horror of obsession, of needing to know an answer to an unanswerable question, which is at the heart of Rex's character. In fact, the moment that I find most compelling is when he's running around the trees. Right before he drinks the coffee, he's just running in these fucking circles. And that has been his life for the last 3 years, running in these circles, trying to find out. And then he runs toward the coffee, drinks the coffee in a single gulp. And that is a physical metaphor of his life after Saskia's disappearance. And for me, he is the most interesting character because we're spending a lot of time. He spends so much time being sucked into this thing, and I think that's much more relatable. I'm much more interested in the horror of the obsession. I'm much more interested in this idea of never being able to find an answer to a question that fucking haunts you, and I think that makes him the far more compelling character of the two. But I've talked enough about him for now. What did you guys think of him? We talked about him as an audience surrogate, but I want to talk about him not just as an audience surrogate, but as a fully fleshed out character in himself.
Well, let me just start with this. Follow me here. I completely agree with you. I think that Rex is a more interesting character ultimately than Raymond. That said, again, my schema here is that Rex has a lot of similarities with us as viewers. We want to know what happened to Saskia just like Rex. It's almost at a certain point when you watch this movie, it's almost impossible to turn it off without knowing what happened to her. Like if I had something, if my wife had said, "Hey, we forgot this thing, we got to go pick up some groceries in the middle," I would say, I don't care. Like, I have to watch this. I have to know what happened here, right? Like, and not being able to turn this movie off is analogous to Rex not being able to have a stable relationship with his girlfriend and not being able to move on with his life. So I know that you want to talk specifically about the interesting parts of Rex, but I think this ultimately wins out the day, Jim, because to the degree that we're Rex, follow me here, to the degree that we're Rex, I see his demise as a kind of punishment for the viewer's curiosity of what happens at the end of this movie. And that's very unique for me. When you watch this movie, you get the sense that you and I, that the viewers, were fish on a line, that we're being pulled in this way and in that by the movie, and that everything hangs on our curiosity to know what happened to Saskia. Maybe that's a fault to you if you watch this movie. Maybe it's so strong that it becomes a fault. But to me, that's the centerpiece of this movie. This film is saying at certain points, are you sure you want to know what happened to Saskia? You can go back if you want. You can turn this off. I mean, is this what you really want? And Rex is getting that same. Are you sure you want to go for? Are you sure you want to drink the coffee? You want to think about, like, what do you want to do, right? And yeah.
But by doing that, by making that relationship between Rex and the audience, I think you're downplaying one of the more interesting parts of the character, and that is, what is it about Rex that makes him so obsessed? What is it about Rex that makes him unable to have the relationship with the lady, the second girlfriend.
His girlfriend. Yeah.
You say it much better than I do know of, but anyway, like, what is it? What is the central aspect about him that makes it? Because if we keep talking about them as sort of audience surrogates, if we keep talking about Rex as an audience surrogate, then if you're telling me that my life, Jim's life, is going to hang in the balance whether or not I turn off this movie halfway through, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the movie halfway through and maybe up Wikipedia or some shit.
But you didn't, right? I think this hangs on on the significance of us as curious agents, right? When you get, so follow me here, when you get what you want at the very end of this movie, when you find out what happens, it's so profoundly terrible that, at least for me, I couldn't help but somewhat feel indicted as a viewer, like, and not like a moralizing, preaching kind of indictment, but like a kind of self-reflective, well, I kind of fucking got what I asked for sort of indictment. That's how I feel in this movie. It might actually be the only film that I've ever watched where I actually felt bad for wanting to know what happened once everything was said and done. Like, I felt terrible at the end of this movie. I felt the emotional equivalent of Rex being placed in that box. Like, to know as a viewer, this was my catharsis, like that this was my tension, the release of tension in this film, burying two innocent human beings alive, that made me feel awful. And I don't ever feel awful when I watch horror movies. Like, we watch movies people being hacked in half, tortured, launched into deep space. We love this shit at the Deadly Analysis podcast. We've seen like all manner of depravity in all of the films that we've covered on this horror podcast. But this movie is the first time where I genuinely felt bad to get a cathartic release from the tension that's offered to me in this film. And I would contrast this really quickly with, I don't know, other psychological horror films that overtly aim to do this. Maybe a movie like Funny Games, for example. You know, movies that kind of feel forced. They feel like I'm being preached at or lectured. And Spoorloos didn't feel like this at all. And so you may want to focus on Rex as Rex, but I want to focus on Rex as us, because the guilt that I felt at the end of this movie was kind of the point, in a lot of ways, I think, of the direction of the film. It felt organic. Like, I can remember the precise moment where like it all came together and I was like, well, shit, I feel terrible. Why did I do this? I should have just turned it off and got groceries with Elle. Like, and to me, that is an incredibly rare and a valuable experience to me as a moviegoer. And it's one of the reasons that this movie is so close to my heart. And I think that to feel that way, it relies on us focusing on Rex as a placeholder for you and I. So I don't want to devalue that too much, but I want to let you go ahead and give your piece.
Sure. Well, let's explore what you're talking about for a little while longer, and then we'll try and talk a little bit more about Rex as a character. So, what is the alternative? If the movie is trying to teach you a lesson, not in a didactic way, but rather in a demonstrative way, what is the source of that guilt that you felt? What would be, like, guilt is always is a form of regret. So what is the source of, what is the alternative? What is the path not taken for you? Is it literally turning off the movie? Because that's not. I think it's.
Why not? What's wrong with that? I have every option to do it. I can go with my second girlfriend. I can choose door number 2. I can go.
But let's focus on you as Rex as an audience surrogate. There's a moment where Rex can just go, look, I got your name. I can just go to the cops, have them, like, essentially question you and interrogate you to the point where you give up.
Nothing will happen, but sure. No, nothing will happen.
It's entirely possible that he could have taken that choice. What is the equivalent of that for you as an audience member then? Does that make sense? Does my question make sense to you?
Sure. I think that there are a lot of potentialities you have as a moviegoer. There are certain movies where you can go. I think this may be the point of the movie, is that there are certain movies where you can go very early on, this is going to be bad. This is going to end poorly, and I'm about to be a viewer, and I'm about to watch something really horrific. Now I got a choice. I can just go, I've seen enough of these movies. I know where this leads. I'm turning this off. I'm going to watch to the end. You have options as a moviegoer, right? And I think that's essentially what his second girlfriend represents. That's her potentiality. So there are a lot of things you can do other than make it all the way to the end and suck it up and see what happens, and to choose to end with your curiosity being the thing that takes you where this director wants to take you. So there's a bunch of things you could do, Jim, but I think ultimately the director knows that everyone's going to want to make it to the end of this movie. Everyone's going to watch it. Nobody's going to turn it off. And knowing that, I think the director gives you something you kind of don't want at the end, where you feel like, oh, I knew it. I fucking knew it. Why? God damn it. I should have known better. I'm going to stop watching horror movies. I need to set up my New Year's resolution to stop being this kind of person. Like there's a whole bunch of things going on here. And I think that's the sort of indictment I felt. It was like it made you reflect on the morals and ethics you have as a moviegoer. The only time that's ever happened to me is in Spoorloos. There's no other film I've ever watched that's made me feel this way. I hope that answered your question. Maybe.
It does. Let's see what other people have to say, and then I'm definitely gonna talk about Rex as a character, not just as an audience.
Well, no, I mean he's a character, but like the value characters have are in our relation to how we describe them and how they function. Like a character existing without our analysis of them in relation to maybe the world that we live in or who we are seems superfluous. I mean.
Right,
like,
but I think that's what you're doing. I think by identifying him as an audience surrogate, you've turned him into Keanu Reeves. You've turned him into the character that is so blank that anybody can just put themselves on him. This is sort of rather old film analysis, is that Neo is everyman, and so he can be so blank that he can be so whoa, that we can just put ourselves onto that character and follow him on it.
Well, I think it's one element of us as viewers. It's not the banality of all viewers. It's this one element we all share, which is our curiosity. We're very different people, sure. Obviously, but we all share this same element that I think in some contexts is a flaw. It's like that looky-loo, I know it's gross to look, but I'm going to fucking look sort of thing.
So it's indicting the audience's curiosity in your point.
Their morbid curiosity, correct.
Can I throw in on this?
Obsession with the macabre. Go ahead, Shayra.
Yes, correct.
I think you're both right. But here's how I want to explain it. So yeah, usually a protagonist might be a little bland, we've seen this in Twilight, except she's way worse than anybody. But we see like a bland kind of protagonist. It's so that we can see ourselves in it. But the thing that they're trying to talk to us about is how much we try to seek out the truth, how much we try to seek out knowledge. We saw this in all of the X-Files, but also I think human beings are just naturally curious. We are always trying to seek out information on things. How far are you willing to go to know things, though? And that's the thing. We all have a tendency to go pretty far when we want to know things. But as Lizzo says, the truth hurts, and it's not fun to know all the truth. Sometimes when you know truth, it does give you wisdom, but there's some pain with it, right? And I think that there's something beautiful about explaining that knowing truths isn't always like this great thing. It's sometimes a horrible thing. You're learning something bad about society or something bad about mankind or how you might not be able to trust certain situations anymore. So it is messed up. And I did think of Funny Games when I watched this. Funny Games I liked, but I think I like Spoorloos far more. But the thing is we do need to think about why it is we want to see what the end has for us.
That's
and it's
really
just human.
I think you're exactly right. I think, yeah, I mean, we should understand, I think, the truth in a lot of situations as being a burden, right? I mean, like, even when you think about the Bible, right, the light bearer, there's a reason that the light must be born because it is a burden. It is a weight. Yes. But I think there's something else here too, and I think that it digs a little bit into a different, maybe potentially direction of why Rex might be interesting as a character, and generally like heroes might be interesting as a character. Like I really don't think Rex would be interesting at all if it wasn't for Raymond. And like the fact that, I think as humans, of course, like, yes, we want to seek out truth, blah, blah, blah. But like in movie after movie, like we see that protagonists really have nothing on their own. They're not interesting characters on their own because they don't have motivation. And like, unless you have kind of like that kind of like opposing force there, as we have here in Raymond, there's really nothing to drive them toward that, right? I mean, is that not the case, Jim? Like in storytelling, obviously you're the king of
I'm not.
literature here.
So I am shaking my head because I think that there is one counterfactual to what you're talking about, and that is the scene in the tunnel. Heroes do not walk away from screaming women in the tunnel. What I'm trying to get at with Rex is I think that what makes him interesting is his flaws. Which makes him the more interesting character is the fact that when we get introduced to him, 10 minutes in, he is a monster asshole. And it is that moment that creates the sense of guilt and a sense of responsibility that he abandoned her once. And then even though his second abandonment at the gas station didn't directly lead to her disappearance, he abandoned her once, and even though his second abandonment didn't directly lead to her disappearance, it is still the residual guilt from that first abandonment that leads him to be so obsessed and so fixated upon her and upon upon what happened to her. And that's why I find him to be more interesting. It's because he has flaws, because he is not a traditional hero, because he is not a traditional part. He can't go under door number 2. He can't start a new life with his other girlfriend because he hasn't been able to resolve the things that poisoned the first relationship. In his mind led to her death.
But he might not be the hero we deserve, Jim, but he's the hero that we need right now. Understand, because he can take this.
And look, I mean, traditional heroes, Jim, have flaws. Pick any superhero; they have a flaw. I just don't buy that. Let me give you the counter to what you said, Jim. I don't think that it's that he left her in the tunnel that is the brunt of why he's after her abductor, right? So let's talk about the tunnel scene and Rex. So initially, I thought that Saskia was actually going to be taken from the car, like while in the tunnel when he leaves. I think the movie kind of makes you think that may happen, but I think having her be taken shortly afterwards in a public place was a much better decision. So recall that him leaving the car results in a fight between Saskia and Rex, right? They fight, but then they make up from it. And in the process of making up, they say a lot of beautiful things to each other, a lot of loving things to each other, things that sort of become their last words to one another, right? The last words Rex is ever going to have with Saskia. That makes her disappearance that much more gut-wrenching to him. It's not that he fucked up at the beginning. It's that he fucked up, acknowledged his fucked upness, corrected it, and had good words with her, right? So without leaving her in the car, there's no fight. Without the fight, there's no affectionate and hopeful last words to one another. And without those last words, those last moments of happiness that so abruptly get taken away, that turn Rex into a moth destined to go into the flame. Like that wasn't the final step. The final step was the things they say and their interaction upon fixing that problem. So I think the scene where he leaves the car says less about Rex and more about, I think, how the director's pulling back that fucking slingshot onto the viewer right before it gets released. That's my perspective.
By the way, can we talk a little? Just not even talk about it. Like, I just want to mention the fact that the foreshadowing they do there at the end of that makeup is beautiful, where they both bury the coin. Amazing, absolutely amazing, fantastic, well written. Yeah.
A nice little metaphor there. I would say that just because I think you know human relationships well enough to know that even after you make up for a fight, from a fight, doesn't necessarily mean that the issues that led to that fight have been wholly forgotten.
That's totally true, but I think what that scene leaves you with is not that vibe at all, Jim. If you want, go back and watch that scene. Ask how that scene ends. It doesn't end with, well, I've remembered what you did and I'm still not cool. It ends with, we're going to have a good time. We're
Right.
good.
Have an excellent holiday is what
beautiful things, good things, and loving things. And that's how they end. Their finality between them is that sentence. And so, well, I mean, that sort of, it's not that sentence, it's that vibe, essentially. And so I think it's more complex than just, you know, they ended on a bad note. They actually ended on a good note.
They ended. What I'm trying to talk about is not necessarily about where their relationship is and whether or not they would actually have fought more if they got to Marseille or wherever they were going. What I'm trying to talk about is what makes Rex a more complex character than simply an audience surrogate, than simply a Keanu Reeves, you know, blank character where we imprint ourselves upon him. I think that you're doing Rex a disservice by sort of talking about him only as an audience surrogate. I'm talking about him as a fully fleshed out three-dimensional human being.
But he's not in the movie. He doesn't have, we don't know anything. No, he's not, Jim. We don't know what his profession, I mean, there's nothing fleshed out in terms of his profession, in terms of his dynamics with his friends. We don't see him ever go out to eat or drink with people he loves. We don't see any interaction with him and his family. We know very little about him at the end of this. He's not meant to be.
We need to know in order
oh no! I mean, we don't have I mean, sort of like we don't have a fully fleshed out picture of who he is and all of the dynamic and differing areas of his life, and it's on purpose. It's because he's a placeholder for you and I. He's not meant to be that sort of deep character that everyone knows to that degree. That's the point. I mean, how much do you know about Rex in this movie? Not much.
Can I say something? The beauty of the fact that Rex and Raymond are the main characters is that they're both gray. They are gray as fuck. There is no black and white. And that is really hard for, especially in 1988, for people to watch. Bad guys are bad, good guys are good. This good guy does all the good things, this bad guy does all the bad things. That's the story. But this story was really well gray areaed with these two main characters. And I think it's supposed to make us uncomfortable with the idea that we could see ourselves in Rex's shoes and we could see ourselves in Raymond's shoes. What the fuck? It should be obvious. It should be black and white, but it's not. And this is a character-driven film. All of these characters are very important. Even the girl goes missing, even though she's in only 11 minutes of the film, she's very impactful.
Yes.
This is character-driven, well-written, well thought out characters. But I do understand what you're saying when you say that Rex is supposed to be like, we're supposed to understand where he's coming from, but we're supposed to do the same thing with Raymond. They are weirdly relatable characters, and that's uncomfortable when you can relate to the killer and to the victim all at the same time. And I think there's a lot of movies that have done it since then, but it was kind of rare for that time period to be that relatable with both of those characters. I think it's really well written, and I'm glad it popped up and people paid attention to it. I know you guys hate Stanley Kubrick, but Stanley Kubrick.
No. I hate Stanley Kubrick. Right. I think everyone else likes Stanley Kubrick.
Goddamn hell for that.
I will, and I will be down there with Stanley Kubrick for creating the films he's made.
And he will make a far more interesting film than you will ever dream.
Nope, I'm just going to be Rex down there talking to him like, "What's my job? What do I do? Where's Saskia?" That's all I'm going to say to him when I'm down there.
May explain this argument even, but like Stanley Kubrick watched this film and talked to the guy who made it, and he was just like, this is the best movie made ever. And so the creator of Spoorloos was like, I actually disagree. There's this film called The Shining that's really good, and Kubrick's like, no, that didn't. It's nothing. and they both kind of had this idea of The Shining is this thing that is, coming at you, and The Vanishing is this thing that's coming at you. It's this idea that there's these things that we can't control, right? It's a control issue. This is the fear. We can't control some shit. Oh no. But yeah, Kubrick apparently really liked this film. Sorry.
The only thing I will agree with Kubrick. The only thing I'll agree with Kubrick
conversation, Ben, and then we'll move on to a quick discussion of some of the filmmaking elements, and then final thoughts. So go ahead and close out this part.
Wow, yeah, I want to talk about this movie a lot. It's so good, guys. I want to say though that if Kubrick actually did downplay his own creation of The Shining, I feel like that's the one case in which he was probably right. Like that's probably the most insightful thing.
Agreed. 100% agreed.
We're doing Dr. Sleep next week, folks.
No man, look,
that's Mike Flanagan. That's much better than Kubrick. Jesus.
Dr. Sleep is the bomb, I gotta say. A little bit of a preview there, but also like when we're talking about the rarity of this kind of movie at its time, I also I'm not sure, again, I always want to try to call out the firsts, and I'm always wrong about this, and Jim, you always correct me, so correct me here. Is this the first movie to have a scene where we have a perspective inside of a coffin with a light? Because whenever I watched this, the first thing I thought of was Kill Bill. And I know that's not the other movie. The only other movie to do this, we have entire movies where we're shot within this confines of a coffin. Obviously there are music videos now where people borrow from that same idea. It's a really compelling shot, but that's the earliest example of it that I've seen, and I think that's really special.
Let's ask our viewers, is there any film before 1988 that shows a first-person perspective shot within a coffin that way? Before 88? Because I don't know either.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think of
it's a concept that has, always been in horror. I mean, this is where we got the ideas of vampires or The Walking Dead. Is the people dying and being buried alive. There's bells that you had to pull a string. I know this is modern take maybe on an old school realistic fear that people had, but being buried alive is being seen on film. I don't know, but I know that that's an old school story.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my question, I would be thinking of a Nosferatu or a early vampire film for a first-person coffin scene.
Sure.
So.
But then all the Draculas have the coffin in a kind of basement or a kind of building where they're not buried alive.
They open up. There's an accessibility to those coffins. What's the first film of it being buried alive where you can't get out?
I specifically, I mean, from the cinematography though, I literally just mean the way it's being shot. That particular shot is an amazing way to shoot a scene. I really love that way of doing it. And there's a handful of movies I think where they actually do that, where you're laying in the coffin, it's dark, they strike a light, that's the only light you have, the camera is right there on the character with him, you get that claustrophobia, you feel it, you see it. I don't know, it's a really great shot, guys. And so that specifically from a cinematography perspective is really kind of what I'm looking for there.
My favorite version of that shot is in the show Misfits. It's a British show, and Robert Sheehan plays a character who is buried alive with his iPod, and that's the light illuminating in there. So if you guys want to check out the Misfits, I highly recommend it. But that was a horrifying scene. The idea that your iPod, which will die soon, is all you have left for light and hanging out in a coffin.
Well, Buried, which is an entire movie of that shot.
That's right. It's the whole movie, right? And that was a really well done movie too. All I'm saying is, if you're buried alive and you strike a match and you watch it die, it's sort of, if you're looking at it and there's blackness around you, it sort of looks like a golden egg. Kind of weird.
So one of the other structural things I want to talk about with this film is that we get the introduction to Raymond in a flashback, which allows the audience to emotionally identify with him before we really figure out that he's the killer. We get a few shots in the actual gas station vanishing scene, but it's hard to really figure out who he is in relationship to the story in that by flashing back the way it did. but I already talked about the genre and how this sort of claims all three elements of mystery: who done it, why done it, and how done it, which is structurally really cool.
One of the things that was really interesting about this film to me is it's got a very Alfred Hitchcock kind of mystery feel to it, and one of the things that Alfred Hitchcock talked about is the suspense that you build is from like showing that there's a bomb under the table, like letting the audience know that there's a bomb under the table, and then just having this conversation going on between two people, and the whole entire tension and suspense that you have is waiting for that bomb to go off. And the great thing about this film is, you know, she's dead, but the whole film is just waiting for this, you know, realization of how, and it is a bomb. It is, and that's why it's so suspenseful. It really does hold that suspense. It's so Hitchcockian in that way. Like I love that you're like, I know the bomb's gonna go off. I know it's gonna go off. Where's the bomb? Eventually, you're just like, and then it happens.
It's the curiosity part. That's the curiosity part that hooks you. You know, yeah.
So I think it's such a great example of suspense. And if anybody wants to like learn about how to build suspense, I think I will recommend this film just for that alone, because it is so good at it. It's so excellent at it.
So speaking of recommends, let's proceed to our final thoughts. So I'll go first, and first of all, I like this film. I like this film fine. I think I will give it a 3.5 out of 5. But what's pulling me back are two things. First, as I've already mentioned, I think that Rex is far more interesting character, and I think he's the far more relatable character, because I want to get into the psychology of a person who becomes so obsessed with an unanswerable question, and then once the question is essentially answered, is Saskia alive or dead? She is dead. That's the answer. Then you're still obsessed with other elements of that answer, and I think that's fascinating, and I want to get more involved with that character. And I think this film is part of when it was produced, and sort of the obsession with the psychology of sociopathy that was sort of gripping the popular culture in the late 80s, early 90s. That for those reasons, the film focused on Raymond much more than it focused on what I consider to be the more interesting character. I don't necessarily think that that's a fault of the film if I'm reading it in context of its time. It is a fault of the film for me as a viewer as I'm watching the film today. So I am giving it a recommend. I am giving it a relatively high score. It just doesn't reach that upper atmosphere, because it's not doing the type of things that I would particularly personally idiosyncratically find interesting, and find an attraction to. I also want to touch on another element, and that is the portrayal of sociopathy. And I already talked about Hannah Arendt's idea of the banality of evil, and as that's being related to Raymond. What I'm far more interested in, rather than getting in the mind of a killer, is getting in the mind of the successful psychopaths. I'm thinking specifically of John Ronson's book, The Psychopath Test. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, because it doesn't actually conclude, but rather it explores the concept of our society rewarding sociopathy and psychopathy. That our society is sort of set up to incentivize psychopathic behavior, and I find that to be a far more interesting "let's get in the head of a psychopath" than what's portrayed in Spoorloos. Because "let's get in the head of a psychopath" here is specifically about the narcissism and the obsession associated and in orbit around this particular violent act, the killing of Saskia and the eventual killing of Rex. What I find more interesting is, what would a movie about psychopaths and sociopathy and psychopathy, where the violent action isn't the murder of a young woman, but rather like the strip mining of of a mountain, or the disenfranchisement or bankruptcy of an entire town. That's the type of psychopathy that really affects human beings today, and that's the type of psychopathy, that's the type of drama of psychopathy that I would be more interested in making a movie about. And I think that as we've sort of progressed as a society, and as we progressed in our sort of portrayal of psychopathy, sociopathy, and mental health issues, that we've gotten some of those movies in much more interesting ways than what Spoorloos has to offer. I'm thinking specifically of Christian Bale in American Psycho, where the metaphor is very specific about how psychopathy is being rewarded in the 80s industrial and monetary environment in which Patrick Bateman finds him in. So that's sort of why there was a sort of disconnect between me as an audience member and this film. That there's sort of a, what I wanted out of the movie wasn't necessarily what I was getting, and I was a little bit disappointed with that. Nonetheless, I'm still recommending it. I'm still giving it a relatively high score. I still understand that it is a well-made, well-constructed, well-shot, well-acted film, and so for that reason, I certainly give it a recommend. So let's go ahead and go to Ben. What do you think about Spoorloos?
Well, I mean, I think, again, like we've all talked about the fact that this is really just like a heavy character study movie, which, I mean, I think that means it's not necessarily going to be for everyone, but it's definitely going to be for me. Like, I really enjoy the way that this is written. And I think it's particularly interesting and special, not just because it focuses on one kind of like main person. Like, obviously you have kind of like the protagonist antagonist distinction and dynamic, but as Shayra talked about before, it's a little bit more gray. And I really don't think either character would have been nearly as interesting had it not been for the other. So really, I think what's cool about this movie is that it highlights the dynamic between two different types of obsession that sort of collide with each other, right? Maybe not. Maybe you don't see this way, but I really do think that, like, if again, like as I tried to allude to earlier, if we think about like Rex by himself, you know, if Raymond had never intervened in his life, obviously we wouldn't have a story. But if it wasn't for Rex's obsession, Raymond wouldn't have been nearly as an interesting of character, because he wouldn't have had, I think, this opportunity, obviously, on screen time to both explore sort of his internal workings, but he wouldn't have had his masterpiece, which I still think was not Saskia's murder, but the fact that he was able to bait this obsessed person willingly into his own demise because of his own obsession. I think there's something about that that's really, really unique. And I definitely respect what you're saying, Jim, about social commentary in movies like this, right? Like, I mean, there's definitely a lot to be said there, and I really do agree with that. But even though we have kind of like a psychopath narcissist character in this movie, which is kind of like the common explanation of why a person would kill another person, like clearly they must be broken in some way. I think what really the focus is not just that or the other. It's kind of like their interaction. And so like that interaction effect between two really pretty interesting characters is what makes this movie special. Not just that, of course, but because it is so incredibly well written, that they can manage to put both decently developed characters in the same kind of like storyline in like an hour and 45-minute movie, or whatever it is, right? Like however long the movie is. I think that though also kind of like goes to like the one sort of point or so that I would kind of like knock off of this, is because it's really hard to get a really complex story like this is really into like a movie format in an ingestible way, in a way that's entertaining, because usually you end up just losing your ability to develop those characters and earn your payoff at the end. But the payoff was definitely earned at the end of this movie, I think, as we were talking about obviously with Noah and his explanation of how like by the end you're like kind of like regretting the fact that you've really sort of gone to the end of this journey and seen what it really meant, right? You got your answer and you sort of like had this feeling that's not, it's a little bit icky, right? And they definitely earn that. But I think the one sort of trade-off that they probably made was the development of Rex's character, right? So if I were going to give this a score, I really wanted to give like Man, like I wanted to go up to like 4, maybe a 4.5, maybe a 4.5 on these. But yeah, I mean, like the only thing that I would really knock off of this is the fact that the director did try to cram this huge complex story into a short amount of explaining time and story time, except that it was so well written that it works. There's so much good about this movie. I think that it outweighs that quite a bit. And so obviously this is going to be a recommend for me. Again, like we were talking about before, I don't know how many firsts really are categorized in this movie, but it's definitely an early prototype of a lot of really cool themes that we see in horror, a lot of really cool cinematography that we see in horror. Just overall, like it's a movie that you definitely should see. And I think obviously that's why it shows up in the Criterion Collection, just because it is kind of like one of those movies that you really need to see to understand cinema as a whole. So again, yeah, because of that, I think my official score, I'll go ahead and say it's a 4.5, and then go ahead and pass it off to Shara.
So this movie is seriously one of my favorite horror films. So this is going to be, like my favorite horror movie. Come and see. It's fantastic to me. So I won't say too much, but I will say this movie almost disappeared from anybody's radar. It was made with very little money, and it went away. And then there was a film festival that one of the movies dropped off, and then all of a sudden there was a placeholder for it, and the guy called the filmmaker and was like, "Hey, didn't you make a movie? We need another movie in this festival." It ended up winning, and then started gaining recognition across the thing. It wasn't meant to be found. This was a movie that was meant to die and never be found. And now I think it has inspired so many amazing fucking films. So for that, it's even more interesting to me because it could have been lost to us all, and it was found. So it's exciting to me to be able to find these movies that maybe they're low budget, sure, but they were able to make characters and make situations that are so fucking interesting that it doesn't matter that it's low budget. It doesn't matter that it looks like, made for TV 80s, like TV show. It's so fantastically done that you have to love it. This is definite 5 for me. This is one of my favorites. Obviously, I put this on my list too, so this was my film, but this is one of those standards for me because I love serial killer movies. I love them so fucking much, and this is like one of my standards for serial killer movies.
Yeah, I give this movie a -3. I don't know. I'm just kidding. No, Spoorloos is fantastic. This is a definitive movie for me. Spoorloos, I'm going to give a 5 out of 5. It is, if for any other reason, that it's one of the films that made me feel something outside of the movie. It made me feel kind of guilty and icky. Let's keep going that word tonight. That icky feeling of being like, it took me all the way to here. This is my comeuppance. This is what I get. This is my catharsis. Just didn't feel right. I felt so wrong at the end of this movie, and I'm a person that doesn't feel wrong at the end of horror films. And it's not even like a stone in the shoe sort of feeling that I would maybe get in a film like It Follows, something that makes me scared and think long and hard about some fundamental component of myself as a person. This made me do that same thing in the moral realm, and that's really hard for me to do. I mean, I think my ethics would be somewhat cashed out as like a moral nihilist. I think that is probably the most accurate way to describe me, and yet here I am feeling the normative weight of a film, of a piece of art that makes me feel the normative pressure of guilt for being an observer for something that is only 20 seconds of shot in a film, and it makes me feel really bad for being a part of a movie like this. And I got to give credence and credit to a film, a piece of art that can do something like that to me. Made a moral nihilist start to wonder about moral objectivity. That's kind of strange. I mean, maybe it's just the weakness of my convictions, or maybe it's just the strength of the movie. But I got to give it a 5 out of 5 for that. I mean, I didn't go over the film aspects of this movie, but this really quickly, this is a very slow-paced film. The music is very quiet there's not a lot of music in this movie. Very quiet, not much music. Very soft, warm, grainy looks. Country backdrop contrasted with sort of vicious action on the part of Raymond. Really weird contrast going on in this movie, but I think the central part is the obsession of the main characters, Rex and Raymond. They're both obsessed. Raymond is obsessed to complete his kidnapping plan, despite the fact that he loses things in his life as a result. For example, the trust of his wife, let's say, in the process, and Rex in finding Saskia, despite losing a woman, a girlfriend, a companion in the process. These are opposite sides of the same coin. And I saw this movie more as a movie about Rex than I did about Raymond. Maybe that's just the fundamental disagreement in this, is that I see Rex as something to be latched onto in this. He's the fish on the hook, and I'm Rex, and I'm right there with him. And so I took that schema and ran with it and felt very bad by the end of this movie. And I hope we cover Funny Games at some point, because I would just shit all over that movie and use this as a way to show how to do it right, how to make someone organically feel bad for wanting to know what happened to a character in a film. I love this movie just for the fact that it took me out of the film and made me moralize a little bit about myself. I can't think of many films that do that. Maybe The Grey with Liam Neeson. I think I was going through a very religious change in my life when I watched The Grey, so there's a little bit of credit I have to just give to that as opposed to the film. But in this movie, I'm not going through anything. I'm pretty deep in my convictions, but this movie made me question them and made me think of myself as a viewer. And feeling dirty at the end of this movie just left a bigger stone in my shoe than many films that I love, like It Follows or Hereditary. So 5 out of 5 for me. I just this movie's a ruiner. It indicts you as a viewer, and it's something to me that just I can't get past. I think I've given a couple 5 out of 5s. Invitation is one. This is another one. 5 out of 5 for Spoorloos. Not the Sandra Bullock one. God damn it.
The Vanishing is the Sandra
Yes.
Bullock and
Yes.
Kiefer Sutherland movie.
That film that shall not be named. Yes. Yes.
Well, we just fucking named it. Well, there you have it. We've got 2 5 out of 5s, a 4.5 out of 5, and a 3.5 out of 5 for Spoorloos. Join us next time. We'll be releasing our next video on September 13th, and that will be the sequel to the Stanley Kubrick classic, The Shining, Doctor Sleep. So we'll see you all then. Be sure to do all of the YouTube things. Thank you for making it to the end of the video, and we'll see you on September 13th.